Hey everyone, it's Chris Shelton, Critical Thinker at Large, coming at you again for an update episode on Scientology, what's going on in the world of Scientology these days. I have, as I think most of you know out there who follow my channel, various sources of information. I've been out of Scientology since 2013, and while I have downloaded a great deal of information and analysis and done a lot of interviews with former Scientologists and other interested parties, some of my information, of course, will fall out of current information because that's just the way things go and organizations move on. I've been talking to numerous sources who contact me, people who are still in Scientology, but are disaffected and under the radar is what we call them, because they no longer want to do Scientology services and they're sort of flying under the radar of Scientology, pursuing them to come back in and do services, as well as former members of staff and the Sea Org who leave and then find out more about what they've been involved in, just like I did. And then they reach out to me or other people and they start telling us what they know. So I've got a number of sources and I'm amalgamating a lot of information I've accumulated over the last 6 months or so from these sources. Of course, I'm going to be very vague and general about who they are because one, it's nobody's business, and two, they of course want to stay discreet. So that all being said, let's go ahead and cover a few things that some of you who have been following a lot of the detailed videos I've put out will be familiar with or will know something about because they're subjects of discussion on the channel. For example, the Church of Scientology has local organizations all over the world, what we call city-level churches or Class 5 orgs, as they're called in Scientology. They don't call their churches churches, they call them orgs, short for organizations. That kind of tells you everything you need to know about their religious status, but whatever. So one of the things I have been asking about is the reaction to Scientology TV within the world of Scientology. And as we all know, it's a bit of a joke. They have spent millions upon tens of millions of dollars on this production facility in Los Angeles, the former KCET production studios. And they took it over for Scientology and they've been producing short videos about I'm a Scientologist and various anti-psychiatry videos and propagating or propagandizing, I should say, Scientology services and principles and things like that. Well, I thought, well, what is the Scientologist reaction to all of this stuff? What are they thinking? Because the staff are required and the Sea Org are required to keep up on the shows that they put out. Apparently they've divided them into seasons now. So when a new season, a new block of shows comes out, then everybody has to catch up on them and watch them. And they have Scientology TV playing 24/7 in the reception areas and of the churches. Well, turns out they're not so impressed with Scientology TV either. I mean, everybody's really eager to see the new shows, but otherwise they really don't care that much. And the net effect of Scientology TV on public inflow, people coming in, responding to their Curious campaign, are you curious about Scientology? And responding to these shows is exactly zero. And there's no big flood of people coming in. Nobody really cares that much about it. It's not having any real effect on, how did Scientology put it? Getting the truth of Scientology out to the world so they can see the miracles for themselves, whatever. Yeah, that's not happening. That's an epic fail, exactly as we predicted it would be. So no big surprise, just confirmatory information that that is the case. Now, another piece of very important news in the world of Scientology is that the pay system for the Class 5 staff has improved. It's gotten a bit of an overhaul. This is something that's been overhauled every few years, many, many times within the world of Scientology. So it's not like the latest iteration is some, climactic event or epic feat. It's just this is where things stand now. They need to retain these staff because attrition is a problem in Scientology when there is not a whole lot of new public inflow. So they got to start paying these guys something, and they do not have to pay them a minimum wage. They're not required per labor laws to do that because they are a church. And the staff of Scientology churches, both staff members and Sea Org members, are considered volunteers. They sign legal documents stating very specifically that that is the case and that they understand that. So they are not, the church is not under any legal obligation to give these people anything. That's what the legalese says in the contracts. However, you know, you can only go with that for so long before people go, well, I'm sorry, I just can't afford to do this anymore. So now a full 50% of the gross income that's produced by the churches every week goes right off the top to the staff pay. The staff pay system in Scientology organizations has always been what's called a unit system. Every single individual in the church has a particular post or job that they do. Depending on the seniority of the job and where it is in the hierarchy of the organizing board, will depend on how many base units are assigned to their job. Let's say the executive director has, you know, 1,000 units, and the lowest, you know, janitorial typist type staff member might have, you know, 100 units or something. I mean, there's a, you know, these are not the actual numbers, I'm just making these up, but there is a unit system there, and each unit is assigned a specific amount of money based on how many staff, so how many total units are there to allocate the money to. Well, the unit then is, you know, the total figure, let's say the gross income is $50,000 for 1 week. Then you'll take $25,000 and you'll divide it by how many units you have to divide up amongst all the staff. That's the unit value, and then you figure out the staff members' pay. So with 50% of the org's income going straight to staff pay now, clearly they do have the potential to make more money than they have ever been able to make before. The problem with that, of course, is that now only 50% of the income every week is assigned to pay the bills, keep the lights on, send money upwards up the command structure to the Sea organization. So this has put even more pressure, actually, on the staff to produce even more just to keep the doors open and pay the bills, much less pay the staff. So and what that translates to is more pressure on the public Scientologists to pay. We know that they have set up automatic debit systems for the public where they just say, okay, I don't really want to hear from you guys every week. Just take $50 a week off my credit card. Here's the number, and away they go. Well, this is now increased because of this change in the system. This has now increased the amount of pressure on the staff in order to, which translates to them committing what are called in Scientology financial irregularities. In other words, criminal acts with finance, with cash. They might bang somebody's credit card without them approving of it. That's called credit card fraud, in case I'm being too cryptic there. They also now are having to set up loans between Scientologists. Now, this is kind of interesting because back in the day, there were what was called loan arranging. This was something Hubbard found out about back in the 70s, I believe, and he put a stop to it. He said in his policy letters that are supposed to be the governing principles of Scientology organizations, they're not, but it's what they're supposed to be. These policies specifically state that the regs, the salespeople, are not to arrange loans. They're not to, you know, set up, hey, get Bill over here who's got some money to give it to Sally because Sally needs to buy some auditing, and so, you know, you give it to her and then she'll give it to me and then she'll pay you back, and it's not my problem if she pays you back or not, that's on her. But, you know, as I'm the org staff member, but I'm now getting the money from Sally. And I've arranged all that. Well, that's not supposed to be what happens, but that is now apparently happening more than ever. In fact, they even have terms like bridging loans or bridged loans, which is basically what I just described. You have somebody who says, yes, I want to do it. They have a credit card maybe coming in the mail, or maybe they've got some income coming in somehow, or they think they do. So the salesperson, the reg, arranges for somebody to cover it on a short term, and then they have to chase up to make sure that that loan gets paid back, because of course the person who's loaning this person money is going to want some reassurances from the salespeople, right? That this person's good for it. And if they're not, or they start falling behind, the church then becomes sort of this broker type person. And that's what Hubbard wanted to avoid, because there's all kinds of entanglements and potentially legal threats as a result of getting involved in that kind of thing. Because it opens the church up to some degree of liability if those salespeople are arranging money transfers from one person to another, especially for church services. So you can see all the problems inherent in this, but the amount of pressure that's being put on these staff members to produce money, 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 in order to even get paid something, forces, sort of forces them in that direction. It's no excuse for criminal behavior, but, of course, that's the predictable and inevitable result of that kind of policy and those kind of activities. The church, of course, as we know, has tons and tons of money in their reserves. They are capable of paying every one of their staff and Sea Org members an actual living wage if they wanted to. But Hubbard set this unit system up. It was his brainchild. And Miscavige, of course, has carried on with it because it serves their interest, because these staff basically become slave labor for them, because the units are wildly variable. And if the org doesn't make any money, or hardly any money in a week, then the staff and everybody else is going to go without. So anyway, that's kind of the update on the staff income situation. So it appears they're making a little bit more money when they are, pulling off better income figures on a weekly basis. But this is definitely a short-term solution, because the amount of heat and pressure on these organizations and the few number of people coming in means they're still cannibalizing their existing base of people for all they're worth, and they're going to have to keep doing that. And again, this is just a bit of a dwindling spiral sort of situation that Miscavige has set up. So that's what's going on there. All right, now as far as the Sea organization itself goes, we have a few updates on what's going on there. First off, there's been a lot of back and forth ever since it sort of first came out, I think maybe a year or so ago, that the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, we thought had been canceled. Now, canceled is a strong word, because that implies that there's some kind of written direction or order or issue that says no more RPF. And that's not what's going on. Apparently what's happening, and it's different in different parts of the world as to what they've heard about this. Like I said, I have multiple sources of information. In one part of the world, they're hearing that the RPF was canceled because Hubbard created it as a pilot program, and it's not, it wasn't meant to be a permanent thing, and so they just kind of abolished it. In another part of the world, though, they didn't really say anything like that. What ended up happening instead was tons of orders started coming down the line to get everybody off the RPF by either offloading them if they've been on too long or were there for, whatever reasons. But mostly if they were just kind of there too long or, lingering on it or something. Whereas the rest of the people needed to get graduated. Now, let's go. Get these people through this program. And they graduated people off the program. Took them a few years. This actually all started, this effort started actually back in 2012 and 13 when I was leaving. And they emptied out the RPF in Los Angeles. There appears to be still an RPF operating in Clearwater at Flag. And what I'm hearing from the general consensus of information, although this is not confirmed, but the information I'm hearing is that there is only one RPF left, and that's the one in Clearwater. So, we'll see if we can find, more corroborating information as I get more from other people as time goes on here, but that's the latest information on that. As far as what are they doing instead, because Scientology is always worse than you think, not better. What they're doing instead is if somebody, depends on the circumstances, but for example, if you have a Sea Org member who has sex with another Sea Org member, you know, they're out of wedlock, whether they're married or not, you're not supposed to have sex in the Sea Org unless you're married. So if they go, you know, playing around, then they're going to get what's called beached. That means they get kicked out. They're put on the beach. That was an old Hubbardism from back when the Sea Org was actually on ships. And they actually did that. Hubbard actually kicked some people off the boat and just left them on the beach, left them at the dock. So figuratively, that's what they do now by kicking them out. If it's a lesser offense, if they didn't really go all the way in terms of sexual activity, because Scientology is all about sexual repression, then they might demote the person, or they might, you know, give them a severe form of punishment, a committee of evidence, something like that. They're going to have all kinds of amends to do. They're going to be in the doghouse for a long time, but they don't kick them out of the Sea Org entirely. There's a thing called, I don't know that we've talked about this a whole lot. Maybe in one episode of my Q&A I talked about this, but there's a thing called the Category B EPF, or Estates Project Force. Now, the Rehabilitation Project Force, the RPF, is the hardcore, heavy-duty, you know, running around, yes sir, no sir, can't speak to anybody outside the RPF unless you're spoken to first. It's kind of like the prison system. The EPF is the boot camp for the Sea Org. So new recruits go through the EPF, and I have discussed that in detail as to what it entails. Category B on the EPF is for existing Sea Org members who are supposed to go back through the EPF program, which is not the same as the RPF program. They go through the EPF program, and they're supposed to get their basics as a Sea Org member back in. That's the point of doing a Category B EPF. And of course, it's used as a disciplinary action. So if somebody screws up, or, you know, is in doubt about whether they want to stay in the Sea Org or not, or they get into some kind of big trouble now, looks like Category B EPF is going to be what they're going to be doing. And it's a tailored program for each individual who lands on the Category B EPF as to what they have to do. But it's generally weeks or maybe a couple months. It's not years. It's studying issues, it's word clearing, it's doing demonstrations and writing essays and figuring out your, you know, where your head's at and all that kind of crap. That's what goes on in Category B EPF. So definitely a lighter grade version of discipline than the RPF, which was a wholly different and very, very intense experience. So Category B EPF is being used a lot more if people aren't just being kicked to the curb entirely. Now, years ago, it started coming to light that there were forced abortions going on within the Sea Org. And we had thought, or at least I had thought, based on a lot of the information we were hearing and seeing, that they had toned down on that, and that the pressure to get an abortion on the part of the wife, because a Sea Org couple, of course, is married, they get pregnant, and the policy of the Sea Org is that if you get pregnant, if you're going to have a kid, out you go. Well, they don't want to lose a lot of people. Again, this attrition rate at the Sea Org level is difficult. It's a difficult problem to have, because it takes a lot more to get a Sea Org member than it does to hire somebody for a Class 5 staff member. So the pressure on the abortion issue is still just as intense as it always was. It depends a bit on who the person is, though. If they're some fresh, green-eyed person and they've been in the Sea Org for 2 months and they get married and they get pregnant right away, they'll probably just be shown the door fairly quickly. But if it's somebody that the Sea Org has invested in terms of training and auditing and experience, they're going to want to hold on to that guy. You know, they send some guy, you know, they get some recruit, and the person's, let's say, been a Scientologist all his life, and he goes to Flag, and he does a bunch of training, he's there for 2 years, and he comes back to his organization, and he's producing, and he's doing a very high-level job of, you know, overseeing auditing, or he's a senior executive or something in a church. Well, then they're going to want to hold on to that guy. So then in that case, there's going to be an intense amount of pressure to get an abortion happening. And guess what? If this happens with a person more than once, if this comes up repeatedly, then it's not just forced abortions. It's forced vasectomies for the man, because clearly there's a problem there. So it's not just the women who are getting this, it's the men too. And so this is now a whole new thing in Scientology, is enforced vasectomies. That's happening. And of course that is way more permanent than an abortion. And I do not say that in any way to make abortions lighter or no big deal or, hey, what's the problem? It's a huge problem when you enforce an abortion on somebody, because that means it's not their choice. You are robbing them of the choice of parenthood. And using pressure and coercive persuasion on somebody and threats and duress and punishment in order to get them to comply with terminating a pregnancy is just absolutely disgusting. It's completely contrary to the entire principle of the pro-abortion movement, and should be, I would think, against the principles of even the pro-life movement, because obvious reasons, right? So this is not good either way, and no matter what camp you're in, this is bad. And then taking away a male's ability to have children for the rest of his life. This is not something that is easy to undo. In many cases, it can't be undone. So this is a permanent action on the part of the male in terms of that. So I can't really think of too many things that are more disgusting than enforcing something like that on your membership. And yet that doesn't stop Scientology, because they really don't have much of a moral bottom. When you're operating on the concept that everything you're doing is for the greatest good for the greatest number, you can justify or rationalize just about anything. So that is now happening. And apparently, just getting married these days and trying to get a room, in the Sea organization, they have dormitory style living. All the boys and men are in one room and the women are in these other rooms, and they have them divided up that way. But if you get married, then the couple gets to have their own room. Not their own apartment, their own room. Well, apparently the waiting lists in order to get a room are upwards of a year or two long. So get married, but good luck on getting a place where you can be with your spouse after hours, because they just don't have the rooms for whatever reason. I do not even begin to fathom or understand that, given how much real estate Scientology and the Sea Org owns. Like in the Los Angeles area, for example, all those blue buildings, the great big blue building with Scientology written across the top, that whole building is dedicated to nothing but Sea Org birthing, last time I knew. And do you think Scientology doesn't have the money to buy another building to birth their Sea Org members in? Of course they do. But they're not about to invest that money on something as insignificant as married couples having their own room. So that's a tremendous problem. That's actually gotten even worse than it was 5 or 6 years ago. The only thing I've really heard about that has actually been an improvement for the Sea Org members is their study, their enhancement time. And I'm loath to call that an improvement, because as everybody who watches my channel knows, I'm not really down with Scientology's methods and procedures and its auditing. I don't think that's a particularly constructive or useful activity. But when you're in the world of Scientology, that's the whole goal, is to do that auditing and get up the levels to full spiritual freedom and immortality. And on that note, apparently the Sea Org members are getting more study time than they have been in the past. It takes them somewhere like a couple years to get through a fairly large, significant step called the survival rundown, or the objectives for you old-timers. They're calling it survival rundown again. And so it's taken them quite a while to get through that. And then once they do, then they do this new auditor training lineup that Miscavige has come up with. And apparently that's going faster for people. But with the new release of this Golden Age of Tech Part 2 that happened in 2013, they revamped all of the Scientology training services, and they re-released them, and everybody had to do them from the bottom up, whether they've done them before or not. This was a wonderful service David Miscavige provided to all Scientologists. And of course, you had to pay for the pleasure of redoing what you'd already done. So apparently this training is faster and easier, but a whole bunch of people, just like happened back in 1996 when the first golden age of tech happened, they were also demanding a full retrain of everything that people had done before. So it happened then, it's happening again now, and people are leaving in droves as a result because they're sick and tired of having to pay to do the same things over and over again. Notice during all this time there's been no new OT levels or no really new services, just rehashed, repackaged services. And that is the marketing genius of L. Ron Hubbard. He was coming up with this stuff. And then David Miscavige has been left to take all this and repackage it so it looks new and exciting and different, even though it's really the same crap, just a new label and nice new packaging on it. Okay, now in terms of the videos I've done in the past where I have critiqued and broken down and deconstructed Scientology's management system, that system basically is still intact. Everything I said before in my video called Scientology Organizational Madness, link below if you're watching this on YouTube, that is all still true. David Miscavige still has an iron grip on Scientology through the Religious Technology Center, and the people who work in RTC are the ones who are running Scientology. There is no one else really running things in Scientology. It is him through his minions, and they directly control what happens at all the Sea Org bases, and therefore they control what happens at all of the Scientology organizations. The management structure I described in that video still exists as far as these levels of management, like I used to work in. I was in middle management. Those levels all still exist. They are still being bypassed all day, every day by the Commodore's Messenger org and by ultimately the Religious Technology Center. So big surprise, there's no change there. There have been cosmetic changes. There have been people who have been transferred here and there. There have been posts and networks and things that have changed, but the overall structure is still the same, and it's still totally ridiculous. If you ever want to experience the joy of pure madness, go join the Sea Org and try to work in management, and you'll find out very, very quickly exactly what I'm talking about. All right, now I have asked a few times to different people, what is the view from inside about some of the things we talk about in the X community? For example, the missing international management staff. Heber Jensch, Guillaume Lesève, Ray Midoff, Mark Yeager. I mean, these are names that old-time Scientologists are very familiar with. It's assumed, apparently, amongst the Scientologists these days that those guys are just old and have gone on to, medical schedules and they're being taken care of. No one in Scientology has a clue about the whole or how these people were stood up and abused for not months but years directly under David Miscavige, who used to beat these people and direct them to beat each other in a total twisted Lord of the Flies kind of situation. That has remained a secret within the world of Scientology, despite the fact that we all know about it out here. It is an amazing testament to the power of information control that Scientology is able to do that. I actually, from an outside view now, even knowing how things operate within that group, I am continually impressed by the ruthless efficiency of the Sea Org, that it is able to control the minds of its membership to that level, to that degree. But they do. And so nobody really has noticed or seems to really care that much about these missing people. And that is one of the reasons that David Miscavige is able to whet his sadistic appetite on those people, because no one knows. And that, of course, would include his missing wife, Shelley, which very few Sea Org members or Scientologists even know exists. They don't know about Shelley. They see David Miscavige's wedding ring and they know he's married, but they assume his wife is just on some post that they don't know too much about, or she's at some confidential location somewhere doing important work. But they don't know anything about the fact that she's been exiled and hasn't been seen in public since 2006. So no cause for alarm there. And also, of course, things we know about, like not just the crazy beliefs, the Xenu stuff. I don't even ask about that stuff because I already know about that. But what about Lisa McPherson? Is this a known thing within the world of Scientology that, you know, she died, that there was that the introspection rundown was involved? No, they don't know any of that. What they know is that Lisa McPherson committed suicide while she was at FLAG, and that's why FLAG has such an intense policy about not allowing anybody who's ever had a suicide threat go onto the base in Clearwater, Florida. That's been a long-standing policy ever since the Lisa McPherson debacle, if not before. It might have actually come from before that. But Scientologists connect those dots because they think that's what Lisa McPherson did. They don't know anything about the fact that she died at Scientology's hands. They don't know about the Lisa McPherson Trust. They don't know about any of that. So again, impressive levels of information control. And of course, that's necessary in any destructive cult. And as we've talked about with Scientology, it is one of the most destructive cults because it is so good and has so many mechanisms in place to enforce behavior, information, and thought and emotional control. The BITE model, according to Steve Hassan. All right, folks. So those are some updates for you. As I get more information, of course, I will give more updates in my interviews and episodes here, but I thought those little bits might be significant and important to some of you out there. So there you go. Thanks for coming around and watching. Leave any questions, comments, or feedback in the comments section below on my channel. And if you find my channel informative, entertaining, and interesting, please consider joining me on Patreon because it is your support that allows me to do the work I do. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.